This book gives a brief introduction to the art of Kempo. Hi guys, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel, Fighting Words, the Martial Arts Library. On this channel I review martial arts books and talk about other martial arts related subjects, and today I'm reviewing Lessons from the Art of Kempo, published in 1987 by author Fred Neff. Now, I've mentioned Fred Neff before in one of my earliest reviews. He wrote a lot of books for younger audiences. I think a lot of those books are still very easy to read and applicable to adults. As an author, his martial arts background, it lists him as being a black belt in karate with proficiency in things like judo and kempo. One question that I had upon reading this book, I don't know what style Kempo it is. It is not the Ed Parker lineage, because it would be Kenpo with an M. This is Kempo with an M. I wonder if it might be Kosho-ryu, which is another one I'm familiar with, but there's really nothing to distinguish what style it is, and he doesn't mention it. Now, chapter 1 of this book is very brief. It covers history a little bit. It touches on the Tamo story, or Bodhidharma story, which is the story of a monk from India that traveled to China and brought various exercises along the way that became the martial arts. He at least doesn't commit to the story, which I appreciate. I think from the stuff I've read about, actual historical stuff, that story is probably more in the realm of myth than truth, although it's incredibly popular. So I do appreciate that he does know that this probably didn't happen the way that it's described. But it is a story that's part of the tradition, so here it is. Now, chapter 2 is philosophy, quote unquote. He covers 10 principles for living, such as practice loyalty and be flexible in your approach. And he details each one. I'm not sure that I would call that necessarily philosophy in the same sense as, something like Aristotle or, Lao Tzu, but there it is. I think a lot of the stuff he covers is generally a good way of living, however. Following that, we get a chapter on exercises, which are mostly stretching and body weight exercises. We get a brief chapter on meditation, which is more about relaxing and deep breathing. And then we get a chapter on training and tips that's mostly in Q&A form. We get things like, what's the difference between a hard style and a soft style and things like that. I think that that's a pretty good approach when it comes to books like this to sort of introduce some ideas. In chapter 6, we get into some of the fundamental techniques. Chapter 6 covers stance. We get a couple of those. It is a little bit brief. We get on-guard positions, and then we get a little bit in the way of footwork. Chapter 7, again, is brief. It's on anatomical weak points, and it's mostly this chart. The next few chapters get into more of the techniques, starting with chapter 8, which is, he says it's on hand techniques. This also includes elbow techniques. One of the things that stood out to me, he's got sort of a palm-up ridge hand strike in here. Some other basic boxing style strikes, some other open hand strikes. He gets into kicks in chapter 9, and this covers, of course, the fundamental kicks as well as some spin kicks, and he does show a kick from the ground, a side kick from a grounded position. If you find yourself on the ground, you can use a side kick from here. Follow these instructions, right? Chapter 10 is on blocks and dodges. That's the name of the chapter. It includes what you would expect to find in, some traditional martial arts as far as the blocking techniques, so, rising block and downward block. It also includes a couple little traps and a wrist lock, interestingly. Following that is a chapter on combinations, and some of these are just hand combinations, some of them are hand-foot combinations. One little thing that I didn't like was that he included some sweeps in here, like foot sweeps. They were not shown in the previous chapters. I'm a big believer that if you're going to have a technique shown down the line, you really should explain it earlier in the book. And chapter 12 is on strategy. I like chapters like this, and I don't think we see enough of it in books these days. He's basically talking about how to approach different types of fighters, like, aggressive fighters and those that rely more on, punching and this, that, and the other. And I appreciate that. And again, when I look at the other martial arts books that we have these days, I sort of notice that those are absent, which makes this chapter stand out a little bit more. And finally, we get a short chapter, chapter 13, which is basically on safety tips for training. And those include things like, stopping short of contact. I guess if you're not training with gear, that's probably a good idea. Not going for throws on someone who's not used to throws. Doesn't know how to land without injuring themselves. Things like always warm up. Again, generally really good stuff. As far as the prose go, I think this has a lot of good basics in it. We can debate the efficacy of traditional blocks and things like that, but if you would look at the fundamental techniques that are found in Japanese karate style of martial arts, there's a lot of stuff here that's covered in a very concise and efficient way. It's also a really easy book to follow. As an author, he's just really easy to read. I called out that question and answer session. There's also a lot of attention to safety in this book, and that's something I appreciate. And I think any beginner in martial arts, or even some intermediate folks, could probably use with, refreshing some of the safety tips. As far as the cons go, I do find it interesting that most Kempo forms I know have forms. There will be unarmed patterns in here. There are not in this book. I don't know if that's an indication that maybe the style doesn't utilize them, because there's no indication about what style it is. Another con is that there do seem to be these almost random techniques, like the wrist lock included in the blocking section, the sweeps that are shown in the combination section, even though, as I mentioned, we don't get any individual instruction on those before getting to them. And I know that's not a whole lot in the way of cons, but it's a really good book as far as what it's presenting, so it's hard to come up with them. So, recommendations. I think this is a good book for someone who is a beginner in like the 3K style of martial arts, something like karate or taekwondo or kempo, where, there's a whole lot of like the traditional rising blocks and, downward blocks and stuff like that. I just really think it's a good intro for that. Especially like the Q&A section, especially the attention to, safety protocol, like make sure you warm up, and here are some basic warm-ups. And I think the introduction of strategy and combinations is also helpful. Just really good stuff for a beginner. Chances are that this has been out of print for a long time. If you can find it, if you are a beginner, I think it's good to pick up. Even as someone who's more seasoned, there are parts of this that inform or remind me of things that aren't at the forefront of my mind, not so much on a technical level, but more on a conceptual level. So, not a bad book to get your hands on if you can find it. And I guess that's all I got. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.